Hi everyone, I am back to report on week 2 of the trial of Dana Rivers, the trans-identified male who's accused of the murder of Charlotte Reed, her wife, Patricia Wright, and their son, Toto Diambu, aka Benny Wright, in their home in Oakland, California in 2016. So the week began with continuing the testimony of the DNA expert witness, the person who actually did the DNA testing on the various blood samples found at the scene of the crime, along with some items with or without blood found at the scene of the crime. And first of all, the prosecution actually asked about whether you could tell Rivers was transgender based on the DNA, and the witness said yes, that the DNA reveals biological gender, which in Rivers' case is male. So we know that the jury knows that much. The witness then goes on to talk about how most of the DNA that they collected seemed to belong to some combination of Reed and Rivers. There was no DNA, from what I can remember, from Wright. There was one sample from Diambu and then one from some unknown pair of people. But most of it was Reed and Rivers. And so I think that kind of shows that may have been where the most dramatic altercation took place between Rivers and Reed. And as we'll see, that's something that's validated in the autopsy report. So they also had an arson investigator come in and said that she thinks that the fire that was started in the garage that night was clearly deliberate, not an accident, based amongst other things that the fire was started from more than one location rather than just one. Then the next day, you had some very morbid testimony from the surgeon who did the autopsy on Reed and Diambu. And not surprisingly, he came to the conclusion that Diambu was shot dead. And in the case of Reed, she was shot, but she was also stabbed upwards of 40 times or more. So pretty grotesque murder. And not only that, one key thing is apparently some of the knife wounds happened while she was still alive, while some of them happened after she had died. And that's significant because the defense keeps trying to bring up the fact that there was no DNA found on the guns at the scene of the crime, that Rivers' DNA was not found on the guns at the scene of the crime. And the prosecution brings up the fact that Rivers was wearing gloves, but the defense makes a point about how the gloves were broken and he was bleeding and Rivers' DNA was all over the place, so why wasn't it on the guns? And I think what was going on is that Rivers was wearing intact gloves at the time that he shot the victims. And that after he switched to using knives to stab the victims, that was when he got cut and his gloves were cut. And apparently there is a wound on Reed's hand, which is consistent with the idea that she may have used self-defense to deflect the knife away. So I think that autopsy gave a pretty clear picture of what happened. Also, this particular surgeon did not do the autopsy on Patricia Wright, but he recited, he went over the report of the person who couldn't testify for health reasons. And once again, Wright was shot, stabbed, although not as much as Reed. And, just echoes the conclusion that this was a violent death, cause of death, stabbing, and gunshot. So then the ballistics expert testified, and the ballistics expert said that you could tell that Diambu was shot and killed with a gun. That was the the gun that was found at the base of the stairs that also appears to be the gun that belonged to Rivers, that had the silencer on it. The bullet, they found the bullet on Diambu and contested that it came from this particular gun. She also said that this particular gun was defective in that while it could fire, it was hard to pull back the slide to, or something about the slide not working properly, so the old bullet cartridge wasn't released properly. And the bullet that was found in Wright was too fragmented to test, but the one found in Reed seemed to match Reed's revolver that was in the bedroom near her. It would seem to me that what happened is that Rivers used his own gun to kill Diambu, and then maybe because he found his own gun defective, grabbed Reed's revolver and used that to shoot her, and maybe Wright as well. So, following the ballistics testimony, there was a very brief testimony from another cop who was present at the scene after the murders to investigate, who just clarified that there were apparently 2 lighters found at the scene rather than just one, and talked about how he saw a bloody fence and footprints near the bloody fence. And then you got an expert on the cell phone data. So he talked about using the phone towers, to the data from the cell phone company themselves, to actually find that, yeah, Rivers' phone was in the proximity, the basic area of Reed and Wright's house at the time the murders took place. And he also was able to extract data from the phones of Reed and Rivers. And there was some texting between Reed and Rivers leading up to the murder that tried shedding some light on their friendship. And it was sort of like, on one hand, they were close, but it was also a bit tense. Like, there was stuff about paranoia of betrayal and stuff about letting down your guard. And there was a text exchange of like the day of the murders. Like, the murder took place on the 11th, and this texting was like the day and night of the 10th. And it was kind of just stuff where Rivers is talking about traveling, I think, from Sacramento to Oakland. And it's kind of playful, maybe. And there's something about Reed is complaining about, quote unquote, getting into trouble with Rent-A-Cop. And so Rivers is coming to Oakland to see her. That's the impression you get. I think also there's a text of Rivers texting his wife. Apparently he was married at the time, saying, P knows where I will be. And P, later on, it becomes apparent, is the president of the Deviants Motorcycle Club. Another thing that was revealed in the cell phone analysis is that apparently there were all sorts of searches and emails found on Rivers' phone that show Rivers buying a lot of supplies, a lot of additions for the gun, this very particular Colt 1911 gun that was found at the scene of the crime, the one that killed Diambu. And there were also some rather menacing images that seemed to be relevant to the case. Like, one showed a burning house that says something about, I'll mess with biker chicks and I'll burn your house down, or something like that. There was some more pretty incriminating stuff on Rivers' phone. Which brings us to that witness. That was the first witness for the defense. was Sandra, the president of the Deviants Motorcycle Club that Rivers recruited Reed to join and that Reed ended up leaving. And the defense, in the initial testimony, in the initial questioning, it kind of made this motorcycle club seem not particularly scary. They were just a bunch of older 50-plus women, mostly with kids, who were just doing this to have fun, and there was no evidence that they were involved in crime or violence. Or, Sandra said she had really no problem with Reed leaving the club. When that happened, when that testimony was given on Wednesday, I was like, oh, I don't think the prosecution is doing a good job at showing motive here if the motorcycle club seems so benign. The next day, though, there was a interlude where there was an expert witness who was a professor who was an expert on tattooing who virtually testified to say that he doesn't really think the tattoos found on Rivers are that big of a deal, that they don't necessarily indicate criminal intent or violence or anything. And then they finally went back to Sandra. Prosecution did her cross-examination of Sandra, and my goodness, that was a really exciting part of the trial, because at this point it really becomes apparent that this Deviants Motor Club maybe wasn't as innocent as we thought it was. Sandra admits that she knows some members of the Hells Angels and other motorcycle gangs. She had made this point before about how the 1% symbol could actually be a sign of being part of a female motorcycle gang rather than being any evidence of criminal intent. And that's different than the 1%er symbol that Rivers had tattooed, which does indicate violent intent. And Sandra emphatically denied that she was a 1%er. She never said, she was involved in a criminal gang or anything. But the prosecution reveals some texts that she sent in which Sandra does affirm that she is a 1%er with some gun and knife emojis. And also it's revealed that Sandra continued her relationship with Sandra and the Deviants as a whole continued their relationship with Rivers even after Rivers was arrested. And there are various audio clips shown that about this. Apparently, they actually tried defending, like they were planning some defense for Rivers. They promoted Rivers to the title of Sergeant of Arms while Rivers was still in prison. There's even some discussion where Rivers mentions that maybe the Deviants could financially profit off of this. Of course, Sandra denied that, but there is an audio clip suggestive of that. And I think really the testimony closes on a very dramatic note. The prosecution begins asking Sandra about her relationship with Charlotte Reed. And, Sandra's like, yeah, I had nothing against her. We were fine. But a couple of texts are revealed that were sent by Sandra that seem to be threatening Reed. Not necessarily like inexplicitly, like, I am going to murder you, but I kind of like, back off, don't mess with me sort of tone. I don't have the exact wording with me, but, it was something like that. And Sandra on the witness stand was just infuriated and emphatically denied that she said anything like that. But anyway, the bottom line is it really does sound like Sandra was trying to hide a lot, and maybe that this motorcycle club actually was involved in more shady business than the defense would have us believe. And so I think on that note, the prosecution's case for motive was starting to come together, that there was some falling out Reed had with this motorcycle gang, and that Rivers, who is fanatically devoted to this group, had her killed, just killed her for it and her family for it. Of course, there are a lot of unanswered questions, but there's probably no way you could try to find anything else out without resorting to hearsay. So I think there was more than enough evidence presented to convict Reed. And the defense didn't call any more witnesses. The judge says we're done with evidence. He let us out early on Thursday, said we're reconvening Monday. I'm assuming that's when the closing statements are going to be given, and then they're going to go to jury deliberations. So we might actually get a verdict next week, which is shorter than I thought. I thought this trial was going to go to like December for some reason. But yeah, so pretty exciting, tragic. But I'll keep you posted. I'll be back on Monday. I won't be able to come Tuesday, but I know people who are, and so I'll keep you all updated. Thank you for listening. Good night.